Okay, so this is a video response for the video that Shane just posted. How do I deal with death? Okay, this lighting sucks. Okay, well, it doesn't really matter. But, okay, so how do I deal with death? I posted it in a comment, but I'm gonna save that for later. I wanted to just give you 3 examples from my life, and I'm gonna relate those onto what I learned as far as coping goes. So, my first really, I guess, traumatic type death, and probably the most to date, was Etheleen. Now, Etheleen was the grandmother of an acquaintance I knew from kindergarten, and we were really close because my mom and I were actually were very close with her, and she would end up watching me every weekend while my parents were out on a trip or doing whatever, and so that's how we formed our bond. She was kind of like a third grandmother to me, and up until about it was 8th grade. 8th grade, I want to say it was 2002. October 31st, Halloween, is the last day that I ever saw her. And the following month in November, like mid-November, around like the 15th or so, she fell asleep. And it's probably somewhat of a good thing because I know that now she's no longer in any pain because she did have cancer. And that's also one way to look at it, is that they are no longer in pain. But basically what happened is that she was a smoker, and she often fell asleep with a cigarette in her hand, and oftentimes it would fall into the trash can, but would normally go out on its own. This particular night it did not, and it began a fire, and at one point she woke up, and she tried to get out of the house, and I'm hoping that the smoke from the fire, that she inhaled it and collapsed or fainted or what have you onto the floor, and therefore did not feel anything. But she passed away in the fire in the middle of the hallway. And the following morning, because my mom had already found out, and she made me breakfast, which was very unusual, but I didn't think anything of it. I'm thinking, ooh, I have the perks, But that day, right after I got out of school, she tells me, literally right after she picks me up, on our way to the car, I break down crying. And the very next day, no, I miss a day. And the day after that, I go back to school, and this was a second stab at me, if you will. But I'm in class, and I had because they read a chapter of the book that we were currently reading, and it was Fahrenheit 451. And if you haven't read that book, it's a book about burning books. And the fire department because what they do is they burn the book. I said that already. But the fire department, instead of putting fires out, they burn the books. So there's one chapter that I missed. Was about a lady who had books, and the fire department was called. She was discovered with them, and they were going to burn the house down, and she refused to leave her house. So guess what happened? I don't have to sing that song for you. So when they caught me up on that chapter, the second that they said, that she passed away in the fire, I broke down crying. And they sent me home. The next day, I almost got into a fight. If it hadn't been for my best friend Ryan, which I'm going to get to later, I would have been in a full-fledged fight, because James, who I'm also going to get to later, remarked about, all he did was walk up to me, because I hated him anyway. He was a bad influence. And he walked up to me and he was like, "Oh, so I heard you cried over a book." He turned around and I punched him like about 5 effing times, because you just don't do that when somebody's dealing with a death. I'm sorry, but you don't effing pick on them. And yeah, so I almost got into a fight, had to go home, and I was put into counseling for it. I would recommend counseling if it's pretty traumatic, like if you lose a parent or a sibling. I would recommend counseling. Otherwise, if you need counseling, I would say probably try with a family member or a friend, because that way you won't have to pay money for a counselor. But either way, they are a great resource. And if you're in college, most colleges, at least I know mine, has a counseling department, and the counselors, as far as I know, are free. So if you're in college, go to one of them, because free counseling. You can't get much better than that. So that's what I would recommend. Now, let's move on to MomMom. MomMom is my grandma on my dad's side of the family. And she was diagnosed with dementia and Alzheimer's, which basically is a loss of memory. And she had it severe. Because she used to live here, then she moved out to Pennsylvania where she was diagnosed. Then eventually she came back here. And for that duration, she lived with us in my house. And she confused my dad, which of course is her son. She thought my dad was her boyfriend. She thought I was my dad, which is kind of interesting because we both have the exact same name. And she thought my mom was a maid, and she hated my mom. And she thought like a room, like a living room, would be a house. She thought like she would talk to herself in the mirror. She thought that was another person. That's kind of how dementia is. And Alzheimer's, I should say. And eventually we had to put her into a nursing home. Eventually she forgot how to talk, how to walk. And for the last few years of her life, she was actually living literally in a bed. And at one point, her body forgot how to swallow. And because her will stated that she did not want to be kept alive artificially, they could not put a feeding tube into her. So they had to starve her. Now, they did put her on medication, but still. The lesson I learned here, because it was an easy death, if you want to call it that, because of the fact that we knew that she was going to pass away, and it was a matter of time, we were expecting it. So that made it incredibly, incredibly, incredibly easy. But I shed only like a few tears. It was the easiest funeral I have ever been to by far. And I don't like saying that, but it's true. And but what was really surreal about her particular funeral was the fact that right after the funeral, I was a pallbearer. Right after the funeral, we have a celebration of her life, as my family called it. And, there was cake, there was talking, there was laughing. It was extremely, extremely surreal. But that's how I prefer to do it, because a traditional funeral, in my opinion, because it's true with me at least, it will make you, I'm not saying you, but it will make you depressed, and it's just not an overall good atmosphere to be in my opinion. So I prefer a celebration of somebody's life, because then you are celebrating everything that they've done, their accomplishments, if they're family, their love for you, your relationships with them, your bonds with them, and it helps you to remember them for who they were, rather than the body you saw in the casket or something to that nature. So that, I think, really, really helps. Now for the last one, Ryan, as I mentioned earlier. I have 2 minutes, I'm going to try to rush this because YouTube only allows 10 minutes. But anyway, Ryan. He was my best friend from 4th to 8th grade. I was, up until meeting him, pretty much the social outcast. I still am somewhat. It's hard for me to hold up a conversation because I don't have a lot of topics that interest me, so I typically sit there and I'm quiet the entire time. Anyway, but yeah, so Ryan became my best friend from like 4th to 8th grade. Then he hung out with James, and James was an effing bad influence. I hate him for that. He got Ryan into smoking, he got him into stealing, probably got him into drugs, and I didn't find this out until high school, but Ryan also sexually touched a girl back in 8th grade. And in high school, when I was in high school, the girl's parents finally found him, and they pressed charges, got him in court, put him in jail. And when I found out about this, I was like, no, I'm sorry, bye-bye. And, I didn't tell him, I didn't, say that to him. I just kind of turned the other cheek. He was calling from the jail. I never picked up. I ignored all the calls. And that's something I seriously regret to this day. And eventually he had an operation because he had like an extra valve to his heart. He had an operation for I don't know what reason. And he died in the operation. So my advice here is that if it's a friend, even if they're in a time of need, and even if you do not agree with whatever it is they did or whatever it is that they're doing, still stick with them by it. Tell them you do not agree with it, but you are still going to be their friend. And I am running out of time, so I hope this helps. If so, great. If not, I hope somebody else can. So, good night.